The shuttle's hull groaned as it broke atmosphere, and Commander Jack Thompson gripped the armrest, watching a world no human had ever touched unfold beneath him. Violet oceans, cities grown like coral, skies streaked with bioluminescent clouds. He had trained for this moment his entire career. Nothing had prepared him for how small it would make him feel. Vex, the first alien civilization to answer humanity's call, and in less than 10 minutes he would be the first person to set foot on its soil. Descent stable, the pilot said. Touching. Down in 90 seconds. Jack ran through the briefing one more time in his head, though he already knew it cold. The Vex Empire spanned 3 star systems, ancient and proud, with a society built on genetic lineage and tightly guarded bloodlines. They had reached out to Earth after decades of silence, a fact that worried the diplomatic corps more than it reassured them. Something had changed on Vex. Something had made them desperate enough to open their borders to outsiders. He did not yet know that the answer to that mystery was waiting for him at the bottom of the ramp. The shuttle doors hissed open, and humid alien air rolled in, carrying a scent like ozone and crushed flowers. Jack descended into a courtyard ringed by towering spires of black stone, where rows of Vex dignitaries stood in ceremonial silence. And at the center of them, raised on a dais that needed no announcement of her authority, stood Queen Lyra. She was unlike anything in the briefing photos. Her skin held a faint silver sheen that caught the light like water, and her eyes, large, depthless, the color of dying stars, fixed on him with an intensity that made the breath catch in his throat. She wore no crown. She needed none. "Commander Thompson," she said, her voice carrying easily across the courtyard, translated through the device at his collar half a second after her lips moved. "Welcome to Vex. We have waited a long time for this day, Your Majesty." He bowed, the way the protocol officers had drilled into him for weeks. "It's an honor humanity won't forget." Something flickered behind her eyes. Relief, maybe, or grief. He couldn't tell yet. He would learn in time that it was both. The official talks began that afternoon in a chamber walled with living crystal that pulsed faintly with the rhythm of some vast unseen machine. Trade agreements, territorial boundaries, the careful language of 2 species deciding whether to trust each other. Jack handled his side competently, but he found his attention drifting, again and again, to the Queen seated across from him, to the way she listened fully to every delegate who spoke, even the ones with nothing useful to say. After the session, she asked him to walk with her through the palace gardens, alone except for 2 silent guards trailing at a respectful distance. The plants here breathed faint light, exhaling soft blue, motes that drifted upward like slow-motion fireflies. "You're wondering why we contacted Earth after all this silence," Lyra said. It wasn't a question. "The thought crossed my mind," Jack admitted. She paused beside a tree whose bark shimmered like scales. "My people are dying, Commander, not from war, not from famine. Our genome is collapsing and has been for centuries. Every generation is weaker than the last. Our scientists have tried everything. We are running out of time and out of options." Jack felt the weight of that settle over him. "And you think we can help?" "I don't know yet." She turned to face him fully, and for the first time he saw past the Queen to the woman beneath, exhausted, afraid, carrying the survival of an entire species on shoulders that had never been allowed to rest. "But I intend to find out." Didn't know it then. But that conversation in the glowing garden was the first thread in a bond that would, within a year, threaten to tear 2 empires apart and create something powerful enough to bind them back together. Jack Thompson had come to Vex as a diplomat. He would leave as something the galaxy had no name for yet. That night, alone in his quarters, he found himself unable to stop thinking about her eyes and the terrible loneliness behind them. He told himself it was sympathy. He told himself it would pass, it would not. Over the following weeks, the talks continued, and so did the walks in the garden. Lyra began requesting his presence at her science briefings, first as a courtesy, then undeniably because she wanted him there. Jack told himself this was diplomacy. His superiors back on Earth, watching the reports with growing unease, were not so sure. And in a private lab buried beneath the palace, a team of Vex geneticists were running a comparison no one had authorized, human genetic samples against the failing Vex code, and finding something that would change everything. Dr. Seneval had spent 11 years trying to save her species and had grown used to disappointment. So when the analysis results appeared on her screen at 2 a.m, she assumed it was an error. She ran it again, then a third time. By dawn, her hands were shaking as she requested an immediate audience with the Queen. "It's not possible," Lyra said, staring at the data projected above the lab table. Twin helixes, human and Vex, rotating slowly with strands of luminous green marking points of compatibility no one had thought could exist. "It is more than possible, Majesty." Senna's voice was hushed, reverent, almost frightened by her own words. "Human genetic material isn't just compatible with ours. It's adaptive in a way nothing in our own code has ever been. It could repair the collapse. Not slow it, repair it." Lyra sat down slowly. For the first time in longer than she could remember, hope felt like something other than a cruel joke. "How do we test this?" she asked. Senna hesitated. "There's only one way to know for certain. A viable hybrid pregnancy." The room went very quiet. Lyra had not survived as queen of a fracturing empire by acting on impulse. And she did not act on impulse now. She spent 3 sleepless nights weighing what she knew already, in the part of her mind she'd been refusing to listen to, that this was not only a scientific question, it was personal in a way that terrified her. She found Jack in the observation tower that overlooked the capital watching the twin moons rise. "I need to tell you something," she said. "And I need you to understand that nothing I'm about to say is a command. You are free to refuse, free to leave, free to never speak to me again if that is your wish." He turned, and something in her tone made his chest tighten. "Lyra, what is it?" She told him everything: the genetic decline, the discovery, the impossible compatibility, the theoretical solution that no one had dared name aloud until now. Jack listened without interrupting, and when she finished, the silence between them stretched long enough that she thought she already had her answer. "You're asking if I'd be willing to father a child," he said finally. "With you? I'm asking if you'd consider it. For my people. For yours too. An alliance built on this would change everything between our species for generations." She looked away, and her voice dropped to something rawer. "And I would be lying if I said the science was the only reason I'm asking." Jack crossed the space between them. "Lyra, look at me." She did. "I've spent every day since I landed here, finding reasons to stay later, talk longer, walk slower through those gardens. This isn't a diplomatic favor for me. It hasn't been for weeks. What passed between them then was not calculation, and it was not duty. It was the quiet, terrifying relief of 2 people admitting something they'd both been too careful to say. The decision that followed was not made lightly and not made quickly. There were ethics councils to satisfy on the Vex side, and, had they known, there would have been a diplomatic firestorm on Earth's. Lyra and Jack chose, for now, to keep the matter contained to a small circle. Senna, the Queen's closest, advisor Marin, and no one else. It was a decision born of necessity. It would prove, before long, to be a mistake that nearly cost them everything. Months passed in careful secrecy. Officially, the diplomatic mission continued. Treaties drafted, cultural exchanges arranged, the slow architecture of trust between 2 civilizations. Unofficially, Jack and Lyra's bond deepened beyond anything either had planned for. When Senna delivered the confirmation, successful conception, a viable hybrid pregnancy, the first in recorded history of either species, Lyra wept for the first time anyone could remember seeing. But secrets on Vex did not stay buried long. Within the palace, whispers had already begun, and not everyone who heard them saw a miracle. Lord Kalis had served 3 monarchs and buried 2 of them, and in all that time he had never once doubted the purity doctrine that held the Vex Empire together. The belief that their bloodline, however weakened, was sacred precisely because it was untouched by outside influence. When his informants brought him proof of what the Queen carried, he did not see a cure. He saw an abomination wearing the crown of his ancestors. He moved carefully. A man who survived 3 reigns of court politics did not act on rage alone. He gathered allies among the old families, those who had watched their genetic decline as a slow, dignified death they preferred to a salvation that came stained with human blood. Within weeks, he had a faction. Within 2 months, he had a plan. Lyra felt the shift in the palace before she understood its cause. Fewer eyes meeting hers in the halls, conversations that stopped a beat too late when she entered a room. Marin brought her the confirmation she'd been dreading. "They know, Majesty," Marin said quietly. "Kalis has been building support among the conservative houses for weeks. They're calling it a defilement of the bloodline. There's talk of—" She hesitated. "Say it. Talk of forcing an end to the pregnancy, by whatever means necessary." Lyra's hand went instinctively to her abdomen, still barely showing beneath her robes. They would not dare move against their queen. "They are already moving, Majesty. They are simply waiting for the right moment." Jack was in the science wing when the first attack came, not against Lyra directly, but against Senna's lab. An explosive device, crude and clearly meant to look like an accident, tore through the genetics facility in the dead of night. Senna survived only because she'd left 20 minutes earlier to check on a separate research thread. 2 junior researchers did not. The investigation was swift and conveniently inconclusive. Everyone in the palace knew who was responsible. No one could prove it. Yet. Jack found Lyra standing over the ruins the next morning, ash settling in her silver hair like gray snow. "This isn't about doctrine," he said. "This is fear, dressed up in old words. It doesn't matter what we call it," she said. "It only matters whether it kills us before this child is born." That conversation marked a turning point. Lyra could no longer treat this as a private matter to be managed quietly. She convened the full council and, for the first time, spoke openly of the pregnancy, framing it not as scandal but as salvation, the only viable path forward for a dying species. Some in the chamber wept with relief. Others, including Kalis, sat in stone-faced silence that was its own kind of declaration. "You ask us to dilute 10,000 years of lineage," Kalis said when his turn came to speak, "for the promise of a foreign doctor and a foreign man's blood. I ask you to choose survival over pride," Lyra answered, her voice steady though her hands, hidden beneath the table, were not. "If pride is what you choose instead, choose it knowing it will be the last choice our people ever make." The council session ended without resolution, which both sides understood meant only one thing. The conflict would not be settled in chambers. Within days, Kalis's faction began recruiting more openly among the planetary guard, no longer bothering to hide their intentions from anyone who already knew which side they stood on. Riots broke out in the lower city, ostensibly over unrelated grievances, but Lyra recognized the shape of orchestrated unrest when she saw it. Earth, meanwhile, had finally caught wind of what their commander had become part of. A furious subspace message arrived from the diplomatic corps, demanding Jack's immediate recall and threatening to suspend the entire mission. Jack stood at the center of 2 collapsing worlds, and for the first time since he'd landed on Vex, he allowed himself to wonder if hope alone would be enough to survive what was coming. It would not be enough, but it would not need to stand alone for much longer. The recall order from Earth arrived in writing, formal and absolute. Commander Jack Thompson was to return immediately, the mission suspended pending review. Jack read it twice in the privacy of his quarters, then did something that would end his career as he'd known it. He didn't go. "They'll call it desertion," his aide warned him. "They can call it whatever they need to," Jack said. "I'm not leaving her to face this alone." His decision reached Earth's diplomatic corps within hours and reached Kalis's faction not long after, proof in their eyes that the human had no intention of ever leaving, that this was no temporary contamination but a permanent foothold for outside influence in the heart of the Empire. Kalis used it expertly, twisting Jack's loyalty into evidence of conquest. He does not stay for love, Kalis told the assembled conservative houses. He stays because his people sent him to plant a foreign seed in our throne, and he intends to see it grow into something that rules us. It was a lie built from half-truths, which made it more dangerous than any honest accusation could have been. Support for Kalis swelled. The planetary guard, long loyal to the crown, began fracturing along old family lines. Lyra found herself, for the first time in her reign, uncertain whether her own military would defend her if it came to open conflict. It came to open conflict 3 weeks later. Kalis's faction struck at the palace itself under cover of a religious festival, when security was traditionally relaxed to allow public access to the outer courtyards. Jack was with Lyra in the private wing when the first explosion sounded, not the crude device that had destroyed the lab, but coordinated, military-grade, the unmistakable signature of trained soldiers turning against their own crown. "Get her to the lower vault," Marin ordered the guards, and for several long minutes the palace became a battlefield, loyalist guards fighting their former brothers in arms in corridors built for ceremony, not war. Jack, with no formal authority, and no weapon beyond the sidearm he'd carried since landing on Vex, placed himself between Lyra and the door regardless. "If they want to get to her," he said, "they go through me first." That is exactly what Kalis wants people to see. Lyra said, even as she let him guide her toward the vault stairs. A human shielding the Vex Queen with his body. It will either damn us further or... The vault door sealed behind them before she could finish the thought, and they spent the next 6 hours in the dark, listening to the muffled echo of a battle being fought for the soul of an empire above them. When the doors finally opened, it was Marin's voice that greeted them, hoarse with exhaustion and something that might have been relief. "It's over, Majesty." The loyalists held the palace. Kalis fled to the outer provinces with what's left of his faction. "Casualties?" Lyra asked. Marin's silence answered before her words did. "More than I wish to report, but you are safe. The child is safe." Lyra closed her eyes, one hand resting against the curve of her abdomen, now unmistakably showing beneath her robes. The empire she had inherited was no longer the empire she would leave behind. That much was certain regardless of what came next. The only question was what would rise from what remained. Word of the failed coup reached Earth within days, recontextualizing everything the diplomatic corps thought they understood about the mission. A human commander who had stayed against direct orders, who had shielded an alien queen with his own body during an attempted assassination. It was the kind of story that either ended careers or began legends, and which one depended entirely on what happened next. What happened next was something neither empire was fully prepared for. The aftermath of the coup left Vex's political landscape in ruins, but it left something else behind too: clarity. Kalis's rebellion, rather than discrediting the pregnancy, had exposed the brutality of those who opposed it, and public sentiment shifted in ways no council debate ever could have achieved. Citizens who had been uncertain now rallied behind their queen, not out of doctrine, but out of disgust at what extremism had nearly cost them. Earth's diplomatic corps, watching the unfolding crisis from a star system away, found itself in an unfamiliar position. Instead of recalling their wayward commander in disgrace, public sentiment back home, informed by leaked reports of his actions during the siege, had turned Jack Thompson into something between a scandal and a hero. The corps, ever pragmatic, chose to follow the wind rather than fight it. Formal recognition of the pregnancy and of Jack's role in it was quietly issued. The mission was, against all odds, renewed. But the true turning point came from Senna's laboratory, rebuilt in record time with triple the security. Her continued research, conducted now in the open rather than in secrecy, revealed something even larger than anyone had anticipated: The same genetic adaptability that made human DNA compatible with the failing VEX code showed promising compatibility. Markers with genetic samples from two other allied species, both facing their own quieter extinctions. This isn't just about saving VEX, Senna told the reconvened council, her voice carrying farther than she'd intended in the hushed chamber. If these markers hold across further testing, human genetic material may represent a viable path to genetic rescue for dozens of struggling species across known space. This child isn't an exception to a rule. She may be the first proof of a new rule entirely. The implications rippled outward fast. Within weeks, delegations from 3 neighboring star systems requested formal audience with Earth's diplomatic corps. Systems that had never before bothered to acknowledge humanity's existence, now suddenly very interested in a species whose biology held answers no one else had found. Earth, overnight, found itself with a kind of leverage and relevance in galactic affairs it had never possessed. Lyra watched this transformation with a complicated heart. The child she carried, conceived from love and desperation in equal measure, secret no longer, had become something larger than either she or Jack had ever intended, a living symbol balanced precariously between hope and exploitation. She worried, in her quieter moments, what it would mean for a child to grow up as a galactic proof of concept rather than simply a daughter. "We won't let that happen," Jack told her one evening, when she voiced the fear aloud for the first time. "Whatever she becomes to the galaxy, she gets to be ours first. That's not negotiable. Not to councils, not to Earth, not to anyone." Lyra took his hand and held it against the place where, for months now, she had felt the small, persistent movements of the life they had made together. "I believe you," she said. "I only wish belief were enough to guarantee it." It was not enough. Not entirely. The political maneuvering around the unborn child would continue long after her birth, factions on both sides hoping to claim some piece of what she represented. But for now, in the quiet of the palace gardens where their bond had first taken root, Jack and Lyra allowed themselves something they'd had little room for amid the chaos. A single evening of simply being two people, soon to be parents, watching twin moons rise over a world that had nearly torn itself apart and had somehow chosen to heal instead. The remaining months of the pregnancy passed under heavier security but lighter hearts. Kalis remained at large in the outer provinces, a loose thread no one had managed to cut, but his faction's influence had crumbled along with his credibility. The Empire, battered, was beginning, cautiously, to imagine a future it had not believed possible a year before. The birth chamber had been prepared with both VEX medical technology and the best human obstetric knowledge Earth could transmit. Across the vast gulf of space, a combination that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier and now represented the entire premise on which a new era of cooperation was being built. Senna oversaw the delivery personally, refusing to delegate even the smallest detail. Jack held Lyra's hand through hours of labor that tested every reserve of strength either of them had. His own fear a quiet, constant hum beneath the surface of his composure. He had faced down armed insurgents in a palace corridor without flinching. This frightened him more. "You're allowed to be afraid," Lyra told him between contractions, finding the energy somehow to offer comfort even as she endured. "I am too." "Then we'll be afraid together," he said, "same as everything else." When the cry finally came, a sound unlike anything either species had heard before, carrying notes of both human and VEX vocal registers in a way that made every attendant in the chamber go still with wonder. Senna lifted the infant carefully, checking vital signs with hands that trembled despite 11 years of careful clinical discipline. "She's perfect," Senna said, and her voice broke on the word. "Majesty, Commander, she's perfect." They named her Hope, a name that needed no translation to carry meaning in either language. Her skin held a faint warmth beneath a soft silver sheen, a blending of 2 heritages made visible in the smallest details. Her father's eyes, her mother's quiet stillness, something entirely new in the curve of her smile. She was, in every sense that mattered, exactly what the geneticists had promised and exactly what no doctrine or treaty could have anticipated. Proof that difference need not mean division. News of her birth spread across known space faster than any diplomatic announcement in recorded history. Delegations that had hesitated now moved with urgency. The neighboring systems whose dying species might yet be saved by what Hope's birth represented began formal negotiations within the week. Even Earth, cautious and skeptical by nature, found itself swept into something larger than any single mission, the beginning of an alliance built not on conquest or convenience, but on the radical, fragile idea that survival was stronger when shared. Kalis, when news reached him in his provincial exile, reportedly said nothing at all. A silence that some called defeat and others called the slow, grudging arithmetic of a man recalculating what mattered most. He would not trouble the throne again, not seriously, not after the tide had turned so completely against everything he'd staked his rebellion on. Lyra held her daughter in the same garden where she and Jack had first walked together, the bioluminescent, motes drifting upward around them like a slow celebration that needed no audience but theirs. Jack stood beside her, watching his daughter's small hand close instinctively around her mother's finger, and felt the strange vertigo of a life he never could have planned for and would not trade for any other. "She's going to inherit a complicated galaxy," he said quietly. "She already has," Lyra answered. "But she'll inherit it knowing it chose, in the end, to come together instead of falling apart. That has to count for something." What had begun as a single diplomatic mission, one commander, one queen, one impossible forbidden bond, had become something far larger than either of them. The first thread in a tapestry of cooperation, stretching across stars that had never before had reason to trust one another. Hope would grow up as a bridge between worlds. The living answer to a question her parents had never set out to ask, but had, in the end, answered with everything they had. The future, uncertain as it remained, no longer belonged to fear. It belonged, however precariously, to the two species, and the one small girl, brave enough to imagine something better. The end.